Let me preface this by saying that I come from a somewhat rural part of Michigan, about an hour and a half north of Detroit, where meth is very popular. My friends and I were driving from Rochester to a house party about 4 miles out of Oxford. We liked sticking to the back roads, so instead of making the sensible decision and going on a paved road, we went down Drano Road. We were driving my friend's Wrangler and going as fast as we possibly could, when we suddenly had to come to a sudden, screeching stop. In the road, about 50 feet ahead of the car, about 25 people stood empty-eyed and expressionless in the middle of the road. My friend put it into first and started slowly approaching the people, who did absolutely nothing to avoid the car heading towards them. As we got closer, they moved only enough to assimilate the Jeep, like when a once-held organism eats another. They stood only inches away from the car and stared in listlessly with blank expressions as we slowly trolled through their human barrier. Once we had passed the last of them, my friend floored it and inadvertently shot rocks into the crowd. This greatly agitated them. They started ranting nonsense and gave a slow, steady chase, but we quickly lost them as my friend drove the car as fast as he could. We only got a mile when my friend rounded a tight corner and hit an enormous pothole. The right front tire suffered from severe decompression and flattened. We immediately jumped out of the car and started the quickest tire change outside of an F1 race. We started hearing their shouts and the job became the fastest tire change ever. As we pulled the jack from under the Jeep, the first of the meth heads started rounding up the corner. We all jumped in the car and never looked back. When you get into your car at night, look into the back seat. When you see the like button, click it if you want to help the channel. The most terrifying thing to happen to me was when I was about 19 years old. I was driving home from my damn boyfriend's place at about 2 a.m. In my town, we have what we call the loop, basically a freeway that makes a big circle around the city. As I'm driving, the loop is deserted. Very common late night on weekdays. Well, I come up on this old beat up brown truck with a camper on the back going about 40 to 50 miles. 50 miles under the speed limit. So I decided to pass him. Next thing I know, I look in my rearview mirror and I see this truck right on my bumper, forcing me to go faster and faster. I am in panic by this point, and as I am watching him, I notice he has some cheap-ass blue and red flashing light on his dashboard, obviously trying to trick me into thinking he's a cop. I was thankfully smarter than that. I decided not to take my exit to my house so he can't see where I live. In my panicked state, I decided to call my older brother and parents to hopefully wake up and be waiting for me to pull up in case he followed me home. Instead of calling the cops, I live in Texas, so naturally my parents owned guns. My logic was dad in the yard with a shotgun. After no luck reaching my family, I just did my best to outrun him. Thankfully, we came up on some cars on the loop, which gave me a perfect opportunity to pass them as quickly as I could and take the next exit. I thought I finally lost him and took the turnaround back towards the direction I needed to go to get to my house. When I see him coming up behind me again, I continued to drive up the access road and watched him get back on the loop. Then exit onto the access road again. He followed me all the way to the light, but instead of going right, he went left. I just sat there and stared at the truck for a few seconds, before turning and hauling ass down the road towards my street. I decided it was best to weave through my neighborhoods by my house to make sure 100% he wasn't following me home. Once I got home, I immediately ran to wake my parents up to call the cops, who were no help until I told them he was trying to act like a cop and pull people over. I always thought that something like that would never happen to me, and if it did, I would be smarter about it and actually call the cops first thing. But when it's happening, you lose your head a bit. Luckily, I was level-headed enough to not break down crying, and do what I could to outrun him. In high school, I worked with the choral and theater departments on the spring musical every year. There was a girl who had graduated a few years before me that everyone knew, and a close friend of mine, who was 2 years older, had known and spoken with about the story. The girl whose stories this is about is named Nat, and how she could see angels and demons. Since she was young, she would always notice these certain kind of people walking around wearing all khaki clothing, button-up trench coats, slacks, long dresses, etc. She said they always had a sort of bland pallor to them. When she was younger, she assumed everyone could see these people. But then she started noticing that they would follow people around. But the people they followed were never seen to notice. Every once in a while, she would also see another type of person, this time dressed all in white, floating unnoticed behind all the people on the street. Then she said that they seemed to realize she could see them. They would show up everywhere she went, and oftentimes follow her. Every time they entered the room she was in, she heard a faint pop noise. Eventually, she told her parents, and they were understandably hesitant about whether or not to believe her. But then, some specific instance occurred where paranormal type things couldn't really be explained away. I would write them down, but my friends told me the story, and it took a good hour or so, and it's been years since I heard it firsthand. So, her parents looked to their priest and their church for help, and after a while they came to pray over their house to help protect it from the demons coming inside. The prayers apparently worked, because the girl told my friend how there seemed to be an invisible fence around the house that kept them from coming near. But she could still see them occasionally stalking around the house in circles, waiting. I still get the shivers thinking about it. I grew up in a mountain in Chugyak, Alaska. My dad, recently divorced, remarried when I was about 16. My new stepmom had loads of cash and a stepson, so we decided to remodel our one-story ranch home. It was the middle of summer, and I was home alone. My family was out of town visiting relatives in Phoenix, and I was sitting in my newly expanded room with the doors shut, with 2 medium-small-sized dogs in the room with me. Now, because we were remodeling, we had the roof kind of half open, with the giant-ass tarp covering up the exposed areas. So there I am. It was probably 10 o'clock at night, and I'm sitting there at my desk probably playing Counter-Strike. Out of fucking nowhere, the house starts shaking. Here in AK, we got quite a bit of earthquakes, so nothing to worry about. But then, the dog starts going fucking nuts. Their hair stand up, and they were laying near the door, and they just sprinted over to me with every hair on their bodies standing up. Then I heard it. I will never fucking forget it. The loudest and most feral noise I've ever heard in my life. First, it sounded and felt like a pickup truck just crashed into my living room, outside of my door. Then, I heard this low, kind of growling-like noise, and my dog literally pissed himself on the fucking spot. I about did too. I grabbed the nearest object, which I think was an old hockey stick, and put my ear against the door. I didn't hear a thing. I waited probably 5 minutes, panicking, wondering what the fuck should I do. I figured I would make a break for the phone in the living room and call 911. I was 16 and scared shitless, give me a break. I slowly opened the door and I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. I looked up at the exposed second story and didn't see much either, although it was dark. I started slowly walking into the living room, turning on every single light switch, even in rooms I wasn't walking in. I'm now slowly making my way to the living room kitchen area, and then I saw it. The couch was flipped over and the rug was against the wall, rolled up. I just got chills typing this, as I am now thinking about how I felt right there, something I try and avoid. I ran right back into my room and shut the door and locked it. I didn't come out until about 2 p.m. the next day. The couch and rug were how I left them, and I had to invite some friends over before I felt comfortable even touching the furniture that was moved. I didn't tell them what happened. I honestly don't like telling this story. It's kinda one of those weird things you just want to black out. What made me think of it recently was watching Paranormal Activity 1. The scene where they hear the loud bang and then go into the living room and the chandelier was swinging brought me back to the memory when I was home alone. The same frightening bang. Fuck. I realized it could have been some large animal, or someone fucking with me. Except all the doors were dead bolted, and I checked a few days later, when I felt my balls come back, the upper exposed floor and didn't see any sign of anything. I never had any weirder experiences after that, just an occasionally, probably paranoid, feeling like I was being watched. A lot of people make shit up all the time for attention and whatnot, but after my experience, I truly believe that some of those fucked up stories are real, and that I may have experienced one.